Good morning, good Shabbos. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online, and this is Shabbos morning Torah study. I'm delighted to welcome to our conversation Rabbi Marc Gellman and Rabbi Sherre Hirsch. As every Shabbos, it's an opportunity to learn with wonderful scholars and wonderful teachers. So glad to have you with us this morning. Very warm morning here in Los Angeles, but I understand it's snowing in the rest of the country. So we send you our warm thoughts and our prayers. This morning we opened the book of Leviticus to the Parsha called Emor, which you'll find in the middle of the book of Leviticus. And I'd like to call your attention particularly to the 23rd chapter, which is one of the three lists of Jewish holidays in the Torah. What we have in Emor is a chronicle of Jewish time. Every civilization sets its own time. And in Torah, we have a set of holidays which create an architecture, or rather a topography, to use a better metaphor, of time. It was the philosopher Abraham Joshua Heschel who made the observation that what Judaism is most devoted to is not the sanctity of space, but the sanctity of time. You go to Rome and you visit St. Peter's Cathedral. You go to you go to China and you visit the Great Wall of China, which are objects in space. And you go to Israel, and all we got is a lousy wall. We have sacred space, but that's not the primary category. The primary category for Jewish life is time. Our cathedral in time, that Heschel called it, was Shabbat. Our great cathedral is Yom Kippur. These are the great architectural treasures of Jewish time. And we live in this kind of Jewish time. Now, this morning, what I'd like to begin with is to contrast Jewish time with what we call secular American or the time of the civilization outside of us. What does it feel like to live in two different systems of time? Rabbi Gellman, talk to me about Jewish time, sacred time, and secular time.
All right, well, there is no such thing as Jewish time. There's such a thing as filled time, which every culture understands. This is just something we've reacted to as Jews that every single culture reacts to, which is not all time is the same. And for us in Hebrew, several words were meant to both identify and differentiate the different kinds of time. So we have eight, Zman, and Moed. Here in this parsha, these are the Moedei Adonai, the sacred times of the Lord. For Judaism and for all cultures, there is a word for time the way clocks divide time, tick-tock, tick-tock, secular, regular time. And for us, that's eight, just the term eight. The rabbinic term Zman has different connotations, but it's also secular time. Moed is filled time. Now, to show you that other cultures have this idea, you see it in Greek. They have two different notions of time. One is called chronos, which is the tick-tock, ordinary time of daily events, and the other is kairos. Kairos is filled time, time with special events in it, the time of the birth of a child, the time of independence of a country, something that fills the time with special meaning. And there's even in German, there's two words, Erfahrungen and Erlebnisse, which describe two different notions of journeying through time. One is just going from point A to point B, and that's Erfahrungen, and then there's time, like the time when someone is born or dies, and that is Erlebnis, a deeper sense of filled time. So the basic point here is that one of the insights of religion, all religions, aside from Judaism, and including Judaism, is that we're not alone, that we are creations of a single God. The other is that the way that God interacts with us for all cultures is through sacred time filled with moments that aren't the same as other moments. And people who are listening can check this out. If you think about the moment your first child was born, if you have children. That moment is not just on a certain day and a certain minute. It's a moment that transforms your life. Same with weddings, the moment you get married, the moment, most of my sacred moments have to do with food, but the time you first tasted a Katz's pastrami sandwich, all right, whatever it is, whatever special thing there is, time is different then. It doesn't move the same way. It's filled with moments. And that's what Franz Rosenzweig spoke about, as these sacred moments are that dimension of sacred time is where Jews live. That's what he meant by the separate existence of the Jewish people. We live in the sacred history. And occasionally, for all of us, in holiday times, in Passover and in the high holidays, and in all of the holidays of our Jewish cycle of the year, time is filled. So my question to you is, do you agree with this differentiation of time, chronological, empty time, and moed, kairos, filled time that gives us special meaning?
Could I just simplify something for a second to translate Rabbi Gellman, which you so beautifully stated? The way I think about it is 8 is time in the sense of what time will you be there? Where are you going? Moed is time like holiday. That's that feeling of Passover. That's Moed. And Zman is season. It's that season of your life. That's the Zman. That's how I think about it in those 3 categories. And now let's think about time in that way.
So what happens here is we impose a narrative structure on time. So we are now in the calendar of the Jewish people. We're now in the period called the Omer, which is described in the Parsha as the 7 weeks that are separating the Passover from the Feast of Weeks, from Shavuot. But in the rabbinic imagination, this is the journey from Egypt to Sinai. So that every year we take that journey, even though we don't move physically. We take that journey and we participate as participants, as pilgrims on our way to Mount Sinai. In the fall, we have a different narrative. In the fall, the narrative is much more natural. We have the experience of the Sukkot, waiting for the rain to fall and hoping that the new season is going to bring us rain. Sherre, I want to apologize to you for asking you the domestic questions, but you're the only one of us living with children at home. Children thrive on structured time. There's a time to get up in the morning, you have to get off to school, you come back, you have your activities, you have homework time, you have dinner time, you have bath time, you have bedtime. This pandemic, having sent kids home in the middle of the school year, has got to have done a tremendous upheaval to the sense of time that children enjoy and that structure of time. How do your kids, you have a wonderful wide variety of kids living in your home, how do your kids experience all this undifferentiated, unstructured time, and how have they built structures in their time?
So you should never apologize for asking me about the meaning of being a parent, because I take that as a privilege. So thank you, Eddie. Every human craves structure and ritual. Every single human. And if you think you don't, ask yourself if you brush your teeth every single morning. So here, my kids have this clear life of ritual and a clear life of structure, and in comes COVID, and that is imploded. So the effect that that's had on us is that everybody's had to reinvent what structure means to them, even if it's in conflict with some of your values. So for example, we only want our kids on the media and on social for X amount of time. Well, we only want them on our computer for X amount of time each day. Well, now they're on digital all day for their school. We sort of imploded that structure in order to replace it. What are we going to say? You can't play games now because you've been on the computer all day long, right? So all these structures that we had in place, we've had to redefine and adjust. And what I find is our kids are probably more resilient than Jeff and I. which I don't know if you guys experience that, but I'm addicted to my structure. My kids seem to be a little bit more malleable. The other thing is what my kids miss most, and I would say that, again, that's for all humans. My son goes to soccer practice on Zoom 3 times a week. He loves soccer practice in person. He runs with his cleats. Now he whines and whines. He doesn't want to go. And finally, last night I said to him, is it just that you miss seeing your friends? He goes, that is the point of soccer practice. So I think there's a real loss here too.
We find in this parsha this idea of mikra kodesh, a sacred moment. And the idea of sacred moments, I think, is such a powerful thing. This is the priestly code speaking to the people of Israel about holiness. We started with the phrase, Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai. You will live a holy life. You will be holy. And in this parsha, the contribution is this notion of sacred moments of sanctity. And we're given a whole list of these, a whole calendar of these. And that notion, I think, is a very powerful thing. It's a sensitivity to the power of moments, which is, as Marc pointed out a moment ago, is not natural to people. Natural to people is to look at my watch and say, oh my God, it's almost whatever o'clock. But the idea that I'm able to perceive and to hold on to a sense of sacred moments. I'm reminded of the last bracha of Havdalah. Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol ben or l'choshech. You're talking about time there. You're talking about sacred time. Time that means something more. Time that unites us. Time that touches us. Time that is precious to us. Here's the next question I'd like to ask you, though. We live not only in sacred and secular time, we live in 2 civilizations at the same time. We're Americans living in this modern American or this global civilization, and we live according to its moments and its time and its clock. And we're Jews, and we live on a Jewish clock as well. They usually correspond pretty well. I mean, in certain cases, for example, when Christmas comes around and my kids can't have a Christmas tree, and so I feel a separation between the two. When I had to carry a matzah sandwich to school when I was a kid, and people didn't understand why I was eating weird food. The people in our communities who have to make a terrible choice between a Shabbos in shul or a Shabbos on the soccer field. So sometimes these 2 civilizations rub up against each other. And the time factor, this question of which clock do I live on, which calendar I live on, suggests this difference. Mordechai Kaplan, the great Jewish philosopher, said that by necessity, Jews live in 2 civilizations at once, which means we have both clocks, both watches on. A watch which tells me American time and a watch which tells me Jewish time. And the question I'd like to pose this morning is whether it's possible to live in 2 civilizations at once, and what does it take, and where are the conflicts? And the reason I raised the question first is because the Torah portion says, here are your times, regardless of the civilization you're going to live in. And I think the Torah was acutely aware that it was offering us a different set of time than the natural time. Because what happens here is that this Torah is not referring to holidays as natural holidays. It's not that in the springtime you'll have this one and in the fall you'll have this one. You're to remove yourself from nature and live as a spiritual being above nature on a calendar that's slightly different from nature. That's number 1. Number 2, this week we will celebrate a minor festival. So this is the Omer, the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. Each day we count. On Monday night, we're going to have Lag BaOmer. Lag is Lamed Gimel. Lamed stands for the number 30, Gimel for 3. The 33rd day of the Omer is an exception taken out of the Omer. It happens to be a joyful festival. The Omer typically is understood in Jewish life, of course, as a time of grieving and mourning. You're not allowed to have weddings, for example, in certain traditional circles during the Omer. But Lag BaOmer is the exception, and the reason is because it was a holiday devoted to the life and then ultimately to the death of a great scholar named Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in the 2nd century CE, was the principal student of Rabbi Akiba. And Rabbi Akiba, of course, was the great hero And he was the one who sponsored the Bar Kokhba revolt. And when the Romans caught him, the Romans tortured him to death in a public ceremony. And you can imagine that Shimon Bar Yochai, his student, was forced to sit and watch this. And because of that, the Talmud tells us, he became thoroughly embittered with Roman civilization. And he took his son and they ran away to a cave. And they hid in a cave, it says, for 12 years. According to the mystics of the tradition, they wrote the Zohar. They wrote the mystical tradition, or they collected the mystical tradition during those 12 years. But the image for the rabbis is so instructive. Here is a man who says, I cannot live in two civilizations because that civilization, the Roman civilization, is corrupt, because it's poisonous, because it'll destroy my soul. And he leaves that civilization. He leaves it in every way possible. He doesn't want to breathe the same air. He doesn't want to drink the same water. He doesn't want to eat the same food as the Romans, and so he runs away. And the same impulse, of course, the same impulse occurs in modernity. The most popular, one of the more popular television shows during this pandemic has been the Netflix series Unorthodox, which has had a certain amount of criticism because it's believed to be, so certain people say that it's not an accurate picture of the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi world, and others say that it's an artistic creation. But the picture that we're given there, regardless of the controversy, is that there are groups of Jews who have said the same thing that Shimon Bar Yochai said. I want nothing to do with your world. I can't live in your world. Your world produced Hitler. Your world produces the degradation of humanity. Your world is poisonous. I want nothing to do with it. And they run away to enclaves in Brooklyn or in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, or in Bnei Brak or in Mea Shearim or elsewhere. They run away in order not to have to participate in the two civilizations. The end of the sugya, the end of the section of the Talmud, God says to Shimon Bar Yochai, get out of the cave. And the story is that he comes out of the cave and he sees people farming. And he says, these people have given up on life eternal and embraced only life temporal. That's the end of the sugya. There's a couple of other endings, but that's the end of the sugya. And so there's a sort of tension there. Can we live in two civilizations? Can we live on two calendars? Can we live with two clocks? Or is it ultimately a futile gesture? What do you think?
Well, my view is very strong on this. I think not only can we must. I would say it plainly. There has not been a form of Jewish life ever, that did not take seriously, that did not integrate, assimilate what the world was learning into Judaism. If you look back at the Talmud, the principles of Roman law, argument from major to minor premises, Kal v'chomer, all these things were taken into Judaism from Roman law directly. It is impossible to consider the teachings of the greatest rabbi and philosopher of all time, Maimonides, the Rambam, without understanding his debt to Neoplatonized Aristotelianism, to the philosophy of Aristotle. It is impossible to understand the Zohar and Jewish mysticism without understanding the spheres of Aristotle. It is impossible. You two love Mordecai Kaplan, and it's impossible to understand his philosophy without the philosophy of John Dewey. And so, no matter where you turn, we have absorbed from the world. And in terms of sacred time, we live in the sacred times of America. It's not just that America gives us secular time. That's not true. Thanksgiving is just one example of an American moed. It is a moed. It is a filled day, a day of special celebration that everyone in America celebrates. Everyone. In fact, it's now penetrated the Muslim community, the Hindu community, who are having turkeys for dinner. So we absolutely live in that. And you cannot explain to me the proliferation of Hanukkah gift giving unless you understand it as a direct response to the Christmas season and the fact that Judaism needed something to balance it. So as a Reform rabbi and as a secular philosopher as well, to me, the notion that there's Jewish truth is ridiculous. It's in fact obscene. There is truth. And the truth is that not all time is the same. And religions understand this, philosophies understand this. And so the question is, can we live without Moadim? If that was the way I would phrase the question. And my answer to that is no. We cannot live with just tick-tock time. We must live with sacred time as well.
But Marc, I want to ask this question, and it's clear that we have answered it from the way we're dressing, from the language we're speaking, from the philosophies we hold. But I want to ask the question in earnest, because it's a question that I wonder about sometimes. Is Judaism better? Is Jewish life better when we engage with the outside world? Or isn't Jewish life better if we isolate from the outside world?
Well, I would say
wait. Let me put it differently. Assuming that this is not an absolute, because look, even the people in Williamsburg have to get on a bus and go into Manhattan to make a living. If you take the two poles of integration and distinctiveness and isolation, should we move the needle over, or have we moved the needle too far? That's the question. Hang on a minute. Let's Sherre, please.
Go ahead, sir.
So what I think is really interesting, it's underneath that question is what do you perceive as the real Judaism? So secular Jews always say the real Jews are the ones that are isolating themselves, and therefore we've gone too far. But if you believe that the real Judaism is the evolution of our peoplehood as it interacts with the social world and other cultures, and as that continues to evolve, that is an authentic Judaism, then I actually very much believe that we haven't gone too far. I think we're deeply in it, right? It's not a question of have we gone too far and we're too secular, or have we gone or we haven't isolated ourselves enough. This is the experience of being Jew in this time and in this culture, and that evolution is the real Judaism. So I think it's all the plethora of the way Judaism is practiced now is what's the magic of Judaism. It's not that we've gone too far or we haven't gone far enough.
See, in this program, Unorthodox, you have this young woman who is really subjugated in the ultra-Orthodox community. The terrible marriage situation that she finds herself in, the judgmentalism of the community, and she sort of liberates herself. Of all places, she ends up in Berlin, which is so painfully ironic. And then it turns out, I don't want to give away the ending because I'm sure all of you want to run out and watch it now, but there's a drama with her mother, and that comes into the circumstance as well. And the program portrays her as being liberated from the subjugation of this tightly knit, isolated, culturally segregated community. She comes out of the cave, and she finds herself outside the cave in music and in relationships and other places. And much of the critique of the program is said, well, they never portrayed what the joy and life within the community is. Now, what we've discussed here is there's the great philosopher Achad Ha'am, great Zionist philosopher of the 19th century, made Sherre's point that in fact, when Judaism isolates, when you put Judaism into the cave, it dies, it stagnates. As Marc said, it needs the life breath of conversation with other cultures. But the question is, can it be done? Can we really live in a totally integrated life, integrated into an outside civilization, and at the same time remain truly loyal to the evolution of Jewish life and create forms of Jewish life that have real lasting power? And that's a late night rabbi worry question. And that's why I thought it'd be good to ask it now, 6 weeks into this crisis.
Yeah,
what does it take?
Look, I think integrating into the society is necessary. It revivifies us. Look, Sherre couldn't have been a rabbi unless we integrated in society and learned from it the values of feminism and the values that women and men should have equal spiritual horizons. I mean, anyone who says to me that isn't it beautiful, the life of the Satmar community, isn't that beautiful? They're all together and Shabbos is seamless. Anyone who says that to me, I say, yeah, imagine if you're a woman. Imagine if you're a woman and you want to read Torah, or you want to get called up for an aliyah, or you want to be a rabbi or a cantor, or you want to decide who you marry, or you 1,000 things, and then tell me how beautiful it is. No, we have to integrate. However, it's risky. And that's, I think, the point that you're intending to make here, which is very powerful. And that is, with every integration, with what's called in philosophy syncretism, the using of various beliefs and forms of other cultures and pulling them into your own, it's risky. There's no question that it's risky. For example, I remember Temple Emmanuel in New York City, the great Reform bastion, in the early 19th century, they were ready to have Shabbos on Sunday. They had Sunday Vesper services, and they were ready to turn Shabbos into a Sunday observance so that we, as Jews, could integrate into American culture where Sunday was the day of rest. There are all sorts of people who have integrated, I think, way too much into American culture and given up Jewish beliefs. And as you know, one of my life's missions is to revive the Jewish belief in the world to come. So what I believe is that we know when we've gone too far, when the values that we're integrating from secular society are not compatible with Jewish values. If they defeat what our religious teachings teach us to believe, then they must be rejected. And in fact, they should be rejected to help the secular society become better.
Problem is that culture is what's invisible to us. So in order to have that kind of careful distinction, we have to look very carefully at those values. And the second problem is that when you oppose a culture's values, particularly the one you're living among, you sound a little bit like a crazy prophet standing on the street corner. So you and I and Sherre have often given the sermon against, say, consumerism, and said that's not a way to a happy life. But, you know, in a world where you're constantly bombarded with advertisement, it's kind of a strange prophetic geschrei. It's a strange prophetic cry out into the night. And
what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with being a prophetic critic of a excessively materialistic culture? What's wrong?
It's not what's wrong, but you have to do two things. First, you have to show the culture what its values are. You have to hold up a mirror, because culture is invisible. There's a beautiful teaching of the Sfat Emet, of the Ger Rebbe, that when Moses first came to the Israelites out of the desert and said, God has sent me, Moses was expecting them to say to him, who is this God who sent you? They never asked that question. What the Ger says is, they say to us, save us from what? And Moses says, you're slaves to Pharaoh. And they say, no, we're not. And he says, of course you are. And they say, no, we're not. Why would you think that we're slaves? You know, that we work all day, that we get paid very little, that you become inured to the condition. It becomes who you and what you are. And the Ger says it wasn't even what Moses said. It was the presence of someone who looked like them, but who lived a very different life than they did, that they suddenly compared themselves to him and said, oh my God, we are slaves. So the first thing is to say to the culture, see, this is where Shimon Bar Yochai was wrong. He retreats into the cave instead of turning to the culture and saying, look what you've become. Look what you've become. How do you do that? Sherre, how do you do that? What does it take to live in two cultures at the same time?
I was just very moved by what you said, because I think everybody has to have the courage to confront those questions. It's easier to go into the cave. It's easier to say, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go into my cave, live over here, and I'm not going to confront the culture. But every modern Jew that's trying to deal with the choice, soccer on Saturday morning, synagogue on Saturday morning, hair salon on Saturday morning, I don't mean to be trite, but that takes courage to say, I want Judaism to be at the center, informing every aspect of my life. And I want to live in American society. And every day, that's a series of courageous choices. And I think a lot of people get tired and say, I can't do it. But I think most of the Jews that I spend time with and that learn with and I learn from and teach, they're all trying to confront these questions in a real way. What does Shabbat look like, right? How do I make it my own when my daughter has cheerleading and this and that? Those are real questions. And I think that's a very courageous thing. I think going into the cave is a little bit of a cop-out.
But let me just add, I think there's another courageous step. Maybe, if I might say, even more courageous. And that is to say, you know what? The secular culture has values that are correct, and Judaism has values that are incorrect, and that are in fact wrong and obscene and need to be changed. And I offer only two examples of that I'm willing to stand behind completely. One I mentioned before, that Judaism's traditional teaching about women is wrong. It may be better than other cultures at the time. It may have had, the ketubah might have been an advance over certain ancient documents. Its view about women is wrong. It's misogynistic, and it doesn't treat women with the same spiritual horizons that it offers to Jewish men. The second is its view on homosexuality and lesbianism. If you are gay and you look to Judaism for inspiration, and you try actually seriously to do that and look through Jewish texts, you cannot find a single text, not a single one, which says this homosexuality, LGBTQ is a form of love, and we do not oppose love. Therefore, our previous oppositions, the two verses in Leviticus that we had in the last week's Parsha, that it's an abomination, these need to be rejected. So, yes, it is courageous to stand against the culture. It's crass materialism, its competitiveness, its willingness to sacrifice the weakest among us, and to allow levels of stratified wealth that Judaism opposes. Yes, that's courageous. But it is even more courageous to say these Jewish traditions, and some of them are not just ritual traditions, some of them are ethical traditions, that some of them are wrong, and they need to be informed by what the culture has taught us. I was ordained in 1972 with Sally Presand, the first woman rabbi to be ordained in the modern period. And the idea that it took till 1972 to ordain a woman is ridiculous. Most of us of sound mind can say one of the critiques of Mormonism is that it took very, very long time for Mormons to accept Black people, African Americans, into the church with equal standing. We all know that. We know that that was a flaw in the Mormon tradition. Why can't we see that our tradition also has flaws, and that the awareness of those flaws came from nowhere else but the secular culture in which we live?
Good sermon, Rabbi. Good sermon. Thank you. Let me just add one more point, and then we'll wrap up together. I think, to Sherry's point about having the courage to confront and to recognize the culture. There's been some lovely reflections during this pandemic and during the social isolation that's come with it about the things we've learned about ourselves from this experience. My friend, colleague, Rabbi Farkas, wrote a beautiful column where he said, for the first 3 weeks, he couldn't hear the freeway from his house anymore. It got quiet. I mean, that like everyone was observing a little Shabbos, because our time structures have been overturned. We've become very conscious of how we spend time. Because we're stuck inside with each other, we've become much more conscious about the texture of relationships between domestic partners, husbands and wives and partners, and children and family. Because we're separated from each other, we crave relationships in ways. We go walking every night, my wife and I, and there's so many people in the neighborhood out walking. And what's kind is everyone just waves at each other. There's a neighborliness. So this crisis in some ways has held up a mirror to certain aspects of our culture that we forgot. We forgot neighborliness. We've recovered it. We forgot the attention to domestic relationships. We've sort of recovered that. I hope we're recovering it. One of the prayers you make is don't let us forget what we've learned, God. Don't let us go back to the way it was before. Give us this sensitivity. Give us back the economy, thank you, but give us back the sensitivity. Give us back a sensitivity. Sherre, did you want to add something to that?
Oh, it's just so beautiful. I just think about that this has been a reset in time. I wonder how Heschel would have described this, from his cathedrals in time to this reset in time. It's been a reset in every way. And there's one thing that you said earlier, Marc, that I just wanted to address. You said, imagine what it felt like for a woman to not participate in Jewish life. And I don't have to imagine it. I lived it. And I just want to share this clothing story. My brother, right before his bar mitzvah, got this beautiful set of tefillin on his bed, and it was waiting for him. And it was just sexy and black and leather. I mean, just what, and right 3 days before my bat mitzvah, I woke up, or Thursday, so excited to see my tefillin on my bed. And there was 2 sterling silver candlesticks engraved. And my face dropped. And my parents, who had spent so much time trying to figure out what was that perfect gift and had gotten these and engraved them with so much love. And I remember looking at them and thinking, candlesticks? He got leather sexy straps. And that was that first moment of like, this is so not fair. And I was always the one trying to sneak in his learning with the rabbis. So I just think it's interesting. I had to share that because
beautiful.
When we talk about time, I feel so blessed that I live at a time that I can learn Torah and be a teacher of Torah. And so many women that have come before me and other people that haven't had that. And I often grieve for them. And I feel like I always want to be a messenger for them as well, because so many women before me didn't have that opportunity. So I just wanted to close with that.
No, it's beautiful. And I want to stand with, I want Marc to understand, I want to show that Marc's standing actually corresponds pretty closely to the Rambam. Maimonides had this question. The great philosophical question is the world eternal or is the world created? Aristotle maintained the world is eternal. The Torah maintains the world is created. And Maimonides was caught between the two because he tried so hard to reconcile the truth of the world outside that he knew, the truth of Aristotle, the truth of nature, with the truth of Torah. And it was his conviction that God gave us a mind in order to achieve that knowledge. And as Marc said, there's only one truth. It's not a Jewish truth or a secular truth or a Goyish truth. There's truth and there's moral truth. We have different narratives and stories, but they come to a different truth. And Rambam, he did such a great job, but on this point, he got stuck because he had to make a choice. And the thing that he writes is, it's a teku, it's a tie. You can't decide. But if I found enough evidence to prove to me that the world was eternal, that is, if science won the argument over Torah, I would take the scientific truth and read Torah as a metaphor. To me, Marc, that is the greatest substantiation of your point, that a believing Jew has to get out of the cave, has to stand in the sunshine, has to know everything the world knows, and still maintain that Jewish values give you a life of Kedusha, but have that kind of fair, open mind to listen carefully to the moral messages of the world outside. So I appreciate the conviction. And to you, Sherre, I'll tell you that you know my wife, Nina. She was the first woman accepted to the rabbinical school of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and the second woman ordained because we had a kid. And when it came time to be ordained, Nina had to choose an outfit. Her predecessor, Amy Eilberg, who came the year before, she came back from Israel to finish rabbinical school, had worn a rather severe blue suit and fit into the graduation picture. You'd have to look carefully to find Amy. But Nina decided if you're going to ordain women, they should look like women. So she and her mother went out and bought this beautiful flowered dress. And right in the middle of the picture, as if to show the men involved, there's a beautiful woman in a beautiful flowered dress. And then the coup de grace was that we sat in the courtyard of the seminary, and my son Yonah was on my lap. He was 2 at the time. And they called Nina's name, and she walked down the aisle to accept her talit and to accept her ordination. And Yonah screamed out, "Ima!" And that's when they knew they're ordaining women, and this is a new part of Jewish life. I want to thank both of you for a very, very good Shabbos discussion. Wish you both a good and safe and pleasant Shabbos. And to everyone who's watching, Shabbat Shalom. Take good care. This morning, following our Torah study in just a few minutes, there's Shabbos morning prayers at 10 o'clock. And then at 11:30, Neshama Minyan, led by that very same Imam, Nina Bieber Feinstein, with cantorial soloist Cindy Paley, will be broadcast right here on Facebook Live. I wish everybody a really good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos.